My stepsister lied and ruined my life. So I cut off my family and took back my future, and then I was 17 the summer my life fell apart. I didn't know it at the time, of course. I thought I was just going on another one of those family trips that were supposed to be bonding experiences, but usually ended up being more stressful than anything else. This time, it was Clearwater Beach, Florida, a place my dad Michael and stepmom Deborah had picked out because of the cheap beach resort they'd found. Clearwater was hot, crowded, and loud. Exactly what I didn't want. I would have rather stayed home, working my part-time job and hanging out with the handful of friends I had, but saying no wasn't an option. My dad didn't like it when I pushed back. So, there I was, stuck in a car for hours with my dad, Deborah, and her daughter, my stepsister, Ella. Ella was 14 at the time, and to say we didn't get along would be putting it lightly. It wasn't that we fought all the time or anything. We just didn't vibe. I didn't trust her, and she didn't like me. Ella was the kind of kid who always got what she wanted. Her mom spoiled her rotten, and my dad wasn't much better. She was their golden child, the baby who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was just there. Not hated, exactly, but forgotten. I wasn't rebellious or wild. I just existed in their world, unimportant and invisible. By the time we got to the resort, I was already in a bad mood. It was one of those places that look fancy in the photos, but end up being kind of run down. The rooms were small, the hallways smelled faintly of mildew, and the ocean view from our window was just a sliver of water between two other hotels. My dad and Deborah had their own room, of course, and I was stuck sharing with Ella. That was the first blow. I tried to brush it off. It was only for a few days, right? I could survive. But Ella made sure I regretted that optimism fast. Ella had this way of making you feel like she was better than you without even saying anything. She rolled her eyes when I unpacked my bag, complained loudly about having to share a bathroom, and shot me these judgmental looks any time I dared to speak. She was the kind of person who could make you feel stupid just by existing near her. By day 2 of the trip, we couldn't stand each other. I don't even remember how the argument started. It was probably something stupid, like me using her hairbrush without asking or her taking forever in the bathroom when I needed to shower. All I know is that suddenly, we were screaming at each other. She threw a pillow at me like a 5-year-old having a tantrum, and I fired back with a snarky comment I can't even remember now. After that, Ella shut me out completely. She didn't speak a single word to me for the rest of the trip. She wouldn't say good morning, wouldn't respond when I asked her to pass the sunscreen. Nothing. At first, I thought it was kind of funny. I figured, fine, if she wanted to ignore me, I could ignore her right back. Honestly, it made things easier. But the silence didn't stop when we got back home. For weeks, Ella refused to acknowledge my existence. She'd walk past me in the hallway without a glance, skip over me in conversations at the dinner table, and act like I wasn't even in the room. At first, I thought she was just being petty. 14-year-olds are dramatic, right? I figured she'd get over it eventually. She didn't. Things got weird pretty quickly. My dad and Deborah started acting differently toward me, though I couldn't figure out why. They weren't outright mean, but something had shifted. My dad, who normally didn't pay much attention to me, barely looked at me when we spoke. Deborah started watching me closely, like she was trying to catch me doing something wrong. I didn't think much of it at first. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just paranoid because of the weird tension with Ella. But then, little things started happening that I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, I came home from school to find Deborah in my room, rifling through my drawers. When I asked her what she was doing, she just said she was checking something. When I pushed her for answers, she ignored me and walked out. I stood there, staring at my overturned drawer, feeling violated and confused. What was she looking for? A few days later, I overheard my dad and Deborah whispering in the kitchen. My name came up more than once. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but the tone was sharp, disapproving, almost angry. My stomach sank as I crept back to my room. I couldn't figure out what was happening, but I had a sick feeling it had something to do with Ella. I found out soon enough. One night, I was sitting in my room, doing homework, when my dad barged in without knocking. His face was red, and he looked angrier than I'd ever seen him. "Where were you last night?" he demanded. I blinked at him, completely confused. "What are you talking about?" "I was here." "Don't lie to me," Hannah, he shouted. Ella told us she saw you sneaking out again. She said you're running around with boys and doing drugs. Is that true? I just stared at him, my mouth hanging open. It was so ridiculous that, for a second, I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. His hands were clenched into fists, and his voice was trembling with rage. Wait, what? I said. I'm not sneaking out, and I'm definitely not doing drugs. What is Ella even talking about? My dad didn't believe me. Not for a second. He just started yelling about how I was ruining the family, how I was going to destroy my future, how I was a disappointment. I tried to defend myself, to explain that Ella was lying, but he didn't want to hear it. He cut me off at every turn, shouting over me until I finally gave up and shut my mouth. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out why Ella would do this to me. What did she have to gain by making up such horrible lies? I thought back to the trip, to the stupid argument we'd had, and wondered if this was her twisted way of getting back at me. Whatever her reasons, it didn't matter. The damage was done. From that night on, everything changed. My dad treated me like a stranger, worse, like a criminal. Deborah would barely speak to me, and when she did, it was to criticize something I'd done or accuse me of lying about where I'd been. Ella, meanwhile, acted like nothing was wrong. She still wouldn't speak to me, but every now and then, I'd catch her smirking, like she was proud of what she'd done. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand her. But one thing was clear. Ella had turned my life upside down, and I had no idea how to fix it. It didn't take long for my life to spiral. At first, I thought maybe it would blow over, that eventually, my dad and Deborah would realize how ridiculous Ella's lies were. I mean, come on. Me sneaking out every night? Doing drugs? Selling my body? None of it made sense. But I underestimated just how deep Ella's poison ran. For weeks, my dad treated me like some criminal under surveillance. Every time I walked through the door, I felt his eyes on me, cold and suspicious. He would ask where I had been, what I had been doing, and who I had been with. If I gave him an answer, he didn't believe me. If I didn't answer, he called me disrespectful and ungrateful. I couldn't win. Deborah was just as bad, if not worse. She would wait until I left the house for school or work, and then she'd rifle through my things. I'd come home to find my drawers half open, my backpack unzipped, and my closet slightly ajar, like someone had been searching for something. One time, she even confronted me directly. "What's this?" she asked, holding up a small baggie she'd found in my room. I stared at her, wide-eyed. It was a little Ziploc bag with nothing but Tylenol in it. I'd had a headache earlier that week, and I'd taken the last of the pills. But to Deborah, it was all the evidence she needed. "It's Tylenol," I said, trying to stay calm. "Don't lie to me, Hannah. What are you hiding?" Her voice was sharp, accusatory, and it made my stomach twist. "I'm not hiding anything," I snapped, feeling myself lose control. "It's literally Tylenol. What is wrong with you?" Deborah shook her head like she was disappointed. "I don't know what's happened to you," she said. "You used to be such a good girl." It was like that every day, little jabs, little accusations. It didn't matter what I said. In their minds, I was already guilty. And Ella? She just watched it all unfold with that smug little smile. I couldn't understand why she was doing this. What had I done to make her hate me so much? Had she always felt like this and I just hadn't noticed? Or was this her idea of revenge for our stupid argument? Whatever her reasoning, she had one. She had turned my dad and Deborah against me, and I didn't know how to fix it. The worst part was how alone I felt. I didn't have a lot of friends back then. I had acquaintances, people I sat with at lunch or worked with at my part-time job, but no one I could really open up to. I was embarrassed, honestly. How do you tell someone that your stepsister is spreading rumors that you're a prostitute and your parents believe her? Who would even believe me? So I kept it all inside. I stopped talking to my dad and Deborah unless I absolutely had to. I spent most of my time in my room, avoiding them as much as possible. I ate dinner alone, came home late whenever I could, and did everything I could to stay off their radar. I started feeling like a stranger in my own house. But things kept getting worse. One night, I came home late from school. I had stayed after to finish a group project, and by the time I walked through the front door, it was dark outside. As soon as I stepped inside, my dad was there, waiting for me. "Where were you?" he barked. I froze, caught off guard. "I told you. I had a group project. I was at school." "Don't lie to me, Hannah," he shouted, his face turning red. "Ella told us she saw you sneaking out earlier today. Who were you with? What were you doing?" I stared at him, completely stunned. "What? I wasn't sneaking out. I was at school, Dad. Ask any of my teachers." He didn't care. He was already worked up, and there was no stopping him now. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he demanded. "Do you think I don't see what's going on here? You're throwing your life away, Hannah. You're a disgrace." The word disgrace hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why are you even listening to Ella?" I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. "She's lying. She's been lying this whole time, and you're just eating it up." That was the wrong thing to say. My dad's face twisted in rage. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. His fists were clenched, his body tense, and he looked like he was about to explode. "Don't you dare talk about your sister like that," he hissed. "She's a good girl. She wouldn't lie." "Oh, really?" I shot back. "And I would? Why do you think I'm the one lying? What have I ever done to make you think I'm like that?" He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he just didn't care. Either way, he didn't say another word. He just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, shaking and blinking back tears. After that night, I realized something. It didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter how hard I tried to defend myself or prove I wasn't doing anything wrong. My dad and Deborah had already made up their minds. Ella had poisoned them against me, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. The next morning, Deborah stopped me before I left for school. "You need to shape up, Hannah," she said, her tone sharp and condescending. "Your father and I won't tolerate this behavior much longer. If you keep sneaking around and lying to us, you're going to have to face the consequences." "What consequences?" I asked, my voice cold. "You'll see," she said. And with that, she walked away. That was the moment I started to feel truly hopeless. My own family had turned against me. I had no one to turn to, nowhere to go, and no way out. It was like I was trapped in this nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. And through it all, Ella just kept smirking. Every time I passed her in the hallway, she would look at me with this smug little grin, like she was proud of what she'd done, like she had won some kind of game I didn't even know I was playing. I couldn't take it anymore. I started avoiding the house as much as I could, staying late at school or picking up extra shifts at work. Anything to keep me out of that place. But the damage was done. My dad and Deborah saw me as a lost cause, and Ella? She just kept twisting the knife. I didn't know how much more I could take. The night my dad kicked me out is one I'll never forget. It was late, close to midnight, and I had stayed at school finishing a project. I knew it would be a problem the second I walked through the door and saw my dad standing there in the hallway, his face flushed with anger. "Where were you?" he snapped. "I told you, Dad," I said, exhausted. "I was at school working on a project. I can show you my teacher's email if you don't believe me." "Don't lie to me." His voice boomed through the house. "Ella said she saw you sneaking out with some guy earlier. Are you really going to stand there and deny it?" My heart sank. "She's lying," I said, my voice shaking. "I wasn't sneaking out. I don't know why she's doing this, but—" Before I could finish, my dad's face turned an alarming shade of red. He clenched his fists, shaking as he took a step toward me. For the first time, I genuinely thought he might hit me. Instead, he slammed his hand down on the kitchen counter so hard it made the whole house shake. "Get out," he said, his voice low and deadly calm. "You're a disgrace, Hannah. I can't even look at you anymore." I stood there frozen, my breath caught in my throat. "Are you serious?" I finally whispered. "Out," he repeated. I don't even remember grabbing my things. I was on autopilot, stuffing clothes and a few essentials into a bag with tears streaming down my face. Ella stood at her bedroom door as I walked past, leaning casually against the frame with that same smug look on her face. She didn't say a word, but she didn't have to. Her expression said everything. I won. I couldn't even look at her. I just kept walking, out the front door, into the night. For the first few days, I crashed on my friend Jessica's couch. Jessica and I weren't super close, but when I texted her saying I had nowhere to go, she didn't hesitate to let me stay. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't have the energy to explain the whole ugly story. All I told her was that things at home had gotten bad and I needed some time to figure things out. Those days were the longest of my life. I felt numb, like I was floating through the world in a daze. I'd go to work, go to school, and then come back to Jessica's place, where I'd curl up under a scratchy blanket and stare at the ceiling until I eventually fell asleep. My dad didn't call. Deborah didn't call. And Ella? She probably celebrated. After a week, I knew I couldn't stay at Jessica's forever. I found a tiny, run-down studio apartment in a crummy part of town. It was the cheapest place I could afford with the little money I had saved from my part-time job. The walls were paper-thin, the floor tiles were cracked, and the bathroom sink leaked constantly, but it was mine. For the first time, I had my own space. No Ella, no accusations, no lies hanging over my head. At first, I thought I'd feel free, but mostly I just felt alone. Over the next few months, I settled into a new routine. I picked up more shifts at work, barely making enough to pay rent and buy groceries. I ate ramen noodles most nights and spent my weekends studying at the library because I couldn't afford Wi-Fi. It was hard, but it was better than being in that house. I tried not to think about my family, but it was impossible. Every night when I lay down in that creaky bed, I'd replay everything in my head. Ella's smirk, my dad's accusations, Deborah tearing through my things. I kept asking myself the same questions. Why would Ella do this? Why didn't my dad believe me? What had I done to deserve this? I never found answers. Eventually, life moved on. I finished high school, barely scraping by with my grades, and found a better-paying job at a diner downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Slowly, I started saving a little money and letting myself dream of something better. Then I met Ryan. Ryan was the kind of guy I never thought I'd end up with. Steady, kind, and patient. We met at the diner where I worked. He came in one day with a group of friends, ordered pancakes, and made a stupid joke about the syrup that somehow made me laugh. I didn't think much of him at first, but he kept coming back, always sitting in my section, always smiling at me like I was the best part of his day. After a few weeks, he finally asked me out. I hesitated. I wasn't exactly in a place where I felt like I could offer someone anything. I was still struggling to pay rent, still trying to shake the ghosts of my past, but Ryan didn't care. He saw me, really saw me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I mattered to someone. Ryan didn't push me to open up about my family. I told him bits and pieces, just enough for him to understand why I didn't have a relationship with them. He didn't pry, and I loved him for that. He just held my hand when I needed it and made me laugh when I was feeling down. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a real life, one that wasn't defined by Ella or my dad or all the lies that had torn us apart. Then, out of nowhere, Liam messaged me. Liam was Ella's ex-boyfriend from high school. I hadn't thought about him in years, so when his name popped up on my phone, I nearly dropped it. I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether or not to open the message. I didn't want anything to do with Ella or anyone connected to her, but curiosity got the best of me. The message was short and to the point. Hey, Hannah. I know we haven't talked in forever, but there's something you need to know about Ella. My heart started pounding. I typed back, "What are you talking about?" His response came almost immediately, and when I read it, my hands started to shake. Ella confessed everything. She admitted she lied about you back then. She told me she made up all that stuff about you sneaking out and doing drugs because she was jealous. She thought you were getting too much attention from guys, and she couldn't handle it. I'm really sorry, Hannah. I didn't know what she did to you, or I would have said something sooner. I just sat there, staring at my phone, my mind racing. After all these years, Ella had finally admitted it. All the lies, all the pain, all the nights I spent crying myself to sleep. It had all been because of some petty jealousy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to go back in time and shove that confession in my dad's face to make him see what an idiot he'd been for believing her. Liam sent another message. If you want to confront her, I'll back you up. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to march straight to my dad's house and make them all face the truth, But another part of me just felt tired. What would it change? Would an apology bring back the years I lost? Would it make me forgive them for the way they treated me? The answer was no. So, I blocked Liam's number, deleted the message, and tried to move on. But no matter how hard I tried to push it down, the weight of it stayed with me. Ella had destroyed my life over something so stupid and small, and even though I finally had proof that I wasn't the villain they'd made me out to be, it didn't make me feel any better. It just made me angry. Life moved on, even if the anger inside me didn't. For a while, I tried to forget the message from Liam. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that Ella's confession changed nothing. My father and Deborah had already chosen to believe the worst about me. They had picked Ella's lies over my truth years ago, and no amount of proof could undo that. Ryan and I kept building a life together. By the time I was in my early 20s, we'd moved into a decent one-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of town. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I was working as a supervisor at the diner, and Ryan was doing carpentry work for a local contractor. He was steady, reliable, and made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid. I rarely thought about my family during that time. It hurt too much to dwell on what had happened, so I tried to push it all out of my mind. Whenever Ryan asked about them, I would brush it off with vague answers. We're not close, or it's complicated. He never pressed, which I appreciated. I didn't need to relive the past when I was finally happy. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang and everything came crashing back. At first, I didn't recognize the number. It wasn't saved in my contacts, and I almost ignored it, but something in me said to pick up. Hello? I answered, my voice hesitant. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then I heard a throat clearing. Hannah, it's your dad. My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard his voice in over 5 years. He sounded older, more tired, like life had worn him down. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, but another part, a smaller, sadder part, kept me on the line. Why are you calling? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk, he said quietly. It's important. I didn't want to hear him out. I wanted to tell him to go to hell for all the pain he had caused me. But against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. Curiosity got the best of me. What could he possibly have to say now, after all these years? We met at a coffee shop downtown a couple of days later. I picked the place because it was neutral ground, somewhere I could leave if things went south. When I walked in, I spotted my dad sitting at a table in the corner, clutching a cup of coffee like his life depended on it. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer and his face lined with deep creases. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him. He stood up when he saw me, a hesitant smile on his face. Hey, Hannah. Hi. I didn't smile back. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was thick and awkward. I kept my arms crossed, waiting for him to speak first. Finally, he cleared his throat. I know it's been a long time, he began, staring into his coffee cup. I'm not sure where to start, but I owe you an apology. I blinked at him, stunned. An apology? He nodded, looking up at me for the first time. I talked to Ella. A while back, she told me the truth about everything. About the lies she told. The things she said about you. My heart felt like it stopped beating. I gripped the edge of the table to keep myself steady. What do you mean? She admitted she made it all up, he said softly. The sneaking out, the drugs, all of it. She said she was jealous of you, and she thought you were getting too much attention. I don't know why she did it, but she did, and I believed her. I shouldn't have, but I did. The anger hit me like a wave. I could feel it bubbling up inside me, years of resentment and hurt spilling over all at once. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask him why he hadn't believed me, why he had chosen Ella's lies over my truth, why he had thrown me away like I was nothing. Instead, I said, so now you believe me? After all these years? He flinched, his face falling. I do. And I'm sorry, Hannah. I can't tell you how much I regret everything. I was blind, and I let you down. I let us down. Yeah, you did. I shot back. My voice shook with barely contained rage. Do you have any idea what you put me through? Do you have any idea what it was like to lose everything? Because you wouldn't even listen to me? I know, he said quietly. I know I can't fix it, but I want to try. I shook my head, my hands trembling. You don't get it, Dad. It's too late for that. You didn't just let me down. You abandoned me. You kicked me out over something that wasn't even true. You let Ella destroy my life, and you didn't even care enough to question it. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't let him. I wasn't done. I spent years trying to pick up the pieces of what she did to me. I lost my family. I lost everything I thought I could count on because you were too blind to see the truth. And now you think you can just say sorry and make it all go away? My dad looked down at the table, his shoulders slumping. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I know I failed you, but you're still my daughter, Hannah, and I don't want to lose you. It felt like too little, too late. I wanted to tell him to leave, to walk away and never speak to me again. But instead, I just sat there, staring at him, feeling an emptiness I couldn't explain. Finally, I said, I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I even want to try. He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that. I understand. We sat there in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing what to say. When I finally stood up to leave, my dad didn't try to stop me. He just sat there, staring into his coffee like it held all the answers he would never find. After that, I didn't hear from him again for a while. I thought maybe that was it, that the chapter was finally closed. Ryan and I kept planning our wedding, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something beautiful for myself. I made the decision early on not to invite Ella to the wedding. I didn't care if she had confessed or if she was sorry. Her lies had cost me too much. Ryan agreed completely. He told me I didn't owe her, or anyone else in my family, a spot at our wedding. It wasn't an easy decision to invite my dad and Deborah, though. Despite everything, a small part of me still wanted them there. I wanted them to see the life I had built without them. I wanted them to realize I didn't need them to be happy. But, of course, nothing with my family ever went the way I hoped. A week after I sent out the invitations, my dad called me again. I hesitated before answering, already dreading what he had to say. Leah's asking why she didn't get an invite to the wedding, he said without preamble. My heart dropped. Of course it was about her. She's not invited, I said flatly. There was silence on the other end. Then he sighed. Hannah, you need to think about this. She's really sorry for what she did. She's been trying to make things right. I don't think it's fair to leave her out. Fair? I snapped, my voice rising. Was it fair when she destroyed my life? Was it fair when you kicked me out because of her lies? Hannah, no, I said, cutting him off. If you can't come to my wedding without her, then don't bother coming at all. There was a long pause, and then my dad said softly, I'm sorry you feel that way. I hung up without saying another word. The phone call with my dad rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I sat on the couch after hanging up, staring at nothing, my fists clenched in my lap. Ryan came over, sat next to me, and put his arm around my shoulders. What happened? He asked softly. It's my dad, I said, my voice tight. He's trying to guilt me into inviting Ella. He said if she's not invited, he won't come. Ryan's face darkened. Are you kidding me? After everything she's done? I shook my head, feeling the anger bubble up all over again. No, it's the same as it's always been. She comes first. No matter what she does, no matter how much she's hurt me, they still choose her. Ryan pulled me closer, letting me lean into him. You're doing the right thing, Hannah. You don't owe any of them anything. I nodded, but the ache was still there. It was so unfair. My own father couldn't come to my wedding, without dragging Ella into it. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that he still didn't get it or the fact that I wasn't even surprised. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a mix of stress and excitement. Ryan's family was amazing. They were so supportive, so involved, so genuinely happy for us that I didn't even know how to process it sometimes. His mom fussed over decorations, his dad helped Ryan build a beautiful arch for the ceremony, and his brother, Mark, even volunteered to walk me down the aisle. It was everything I had never had with my own family. But despite all the love around me, I couldn't stop thinking about the people who wouldn't be there. I kept wondering if my dad would change his mind, if maybe he'd show up at the last minute, ready to be there for me like a father should. But as the days ticked by and I didn't hear from him again, I knew I couldn't let myself hope. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up feeling nervous but oddly calm. I looked at myself in the mirror after getting ready, the soft ivory of my dress glowing in the morning light. I looked happy. It was the first time in years that I really recognized the girl staring back at me. Ryan knocked on the door to check on me before the ceremony. "You ready?" he asked with a smile. I nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I really was. The ceremony was beautiful. Mark walked me down the aisle, and when I saw Ryan standing there, waiting for me, all of the stress and sadness melted away. The sun was shining, the flowers were perfect, and the people who mattered most were there. When we exchanged our vows, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. For so long, I had let my family's pain and betrayal define me, but not anymore. Standing there with Ryan, surrounded by people who truly loved me, I realized something important. I didn't need my father's approval. I didn't need Ella's apology. I didn't need their presence to be happy. I was finally free. After the wedding, life felt normal, quiet. I didn't hear from my dad or Deborah, and Ella stayed out of my life completely. Ryan and I settled into married life, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally moving forward without dragging the weight of my past behind me. But, of course, nothing ever stays quiet for long when it comes to my family. About a month after the wedding, I got a long, rambling text from Deborah. She went on and on about how they missed me, how Ella was so sorry for what she did, and how I needed to let it go for the sake of the family. I almost laughed. After everything, they still didn't get it. They thought this was something I could just forgive and forget, like years of pain and betrayal were no big deal. I didn't respond. A week later, my dad emailed me. It was short and to the point. "We miss you. Let's talk." I stared at that email for a long time, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. Why was it always on me to fix things? Why was I always the one who had to reach out, to forgive, to make things right? I had given them chance after chance, and every time, they let me down. I didn't respond to the email either. Instead, I blocked their numbers, deleted their messages, and told myself that this was it. No more second chances. No more hoping for something that would never happen. Ryan told me over and over again that I was making the right decision. "You don't owe them anything," he said one night as he held me close. "You deserve to be happy without their toxicity dragging you down." And he was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I spent so many years chasing after their approval, trying to make them see my side of things. But the truth is, I didn't need them. I had Ryan. I had his family, my friends, and the life we were building together. That was enough for me. I'd spent too long living in the shadow of Ella's lies, but not anymore. I was done looking back. Sometimes, you have to let go of the people who hurt you, even if they're family, because your happiness, your peace, and your future are worth so much more. And for the first time in my life, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.